Hey guys, tonight we embark on a journey, not through thrilling battles or scandalous court intrigue, but through the quiet, unassuming life cycle of a barley plant, specifically one destined for use in the sacred, ancient temple rites of Persia. We're going to imagine ourselves standing in a field under a vast, star-strewn sky, miles and miles from anywhere familiar. The only sounds the gentle rustling of dry stalks and perhaps the distant call of a night bird. You feel the cool earth beneath your bare feet, smell the dry, dusty air mixed with the faint, sweet scent of something green and growing. This isn't a blockbuster history special, it's the slow, deliberate pace of history as lived by the plants and the people who depended upon them, and let's be honest, you probably won't survive this level of historical detail without drifting off. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like sharing where you're tuning in from, maybe drop your location and the local time in the comments below. It's always cool to see how far these little trips through time reach. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are here, standing in a field that stretches further than your modern mind can easily grasp, under a sky so clear and full of stars it feels like a blanket woven with diamond threads. This isn't just any field, though it looks unassuming enough. It's a field somewhere in the vast territories controlled by the ancient Persian Empire, back when empires were really, truly vast. We're talking about a time long, long ago, a time where empires rose and fell, and the rhythm of life was dictated less by the ping of a notification and more by the slow, predictable turning of the seasons. You feel the cool, dry earth, maybe a few small stones digging slightly into your heel as you shift your weight. The air is still, carrying that specific scent of dry soil and the faint, almost imperceptible fragrance of growing things. It's a smell that speaks of deep history, of countless generations living and working on this very land. You look around, letting your eyes adjust to the moonlight. There are no street lights here, no distant glow of a city. Just the land, the sky, and the quiet presence of what is growing all around you. And what is growing, what is absolutely everywhere in this particular field, is barley. Miles and miles of it, in different stages of growth depending on where you look, but right here, where you stand, it's probably reaching a decent height, maybe up to your knees or even higher if the season is right. You can almost hear it, can't you? That tiny, subtle sound of leaves unfolding, stalks strengthening, roots reaching deeper into the soil. It's the sound of silent, determined life. Barley. It seems so simple, doesn't it? Just a grain, something you might see in a health food store or perhaps, in another form, in a pub. But here, in this time and place, barley is life itself. It's the fundamental building block of the diet for millions of people. You know how sometimes you feel like you need your morning coffee or that specific snack to function? Well, for these ancient Persians, barley held that kind of critical, almost sacred importance, not just for getting through the day, but for the very survival of their society. It was sustenance, plain and simple. A staple crop, meaning it was one of the main things people ate, day in and day out. You could make bread from it, gruel, porridge, even early forms of beer, which, let's face it, makes a difficult historical period sound slightly more appealing, doesn't it? Imagine trudging through the heat all day and knowing a nice barley beverage awaited you. Ah, the simple pleasures. But barley was more than just food or drink. In this culture, it held a deeper significance. Because of its essential role in sustaining life, it became intertwined with religious beliefs, with the very concept of prosperity, fertility, and the blessings of the divine. It wasn't just a plant, it was a gift from the earth, a symbol of the connection between humanity and the cosmic forces that govern the seasons and the harvest. You can almost feel that sense of reverence in the air here, a quiet respect for the simple stalks swaying gently around you. It's not just agricultural land, it feels important, significant. like it holds secrets whispered between the wind and the growing grain. Think about the roots of this barley. They're down there, beneath your feet, silently, tirelessly pushing deeper, anchoring the plant, seeking out water and nutrients. They are the hidden foundation, the part of the plant you rarely see but upon which everything else depends. And in a way, that's what we're exploring tonight. The hidden foundations, the quiet processes, the deep roots of history that sustained entire civilizations. We're going to follow one specific lineage of these silent, unseen processes, the journey of barley from a tiny seed, deep in the earth, through its growth cycle, all the way to its use in the solemn, measured rites performed within the walls of a Persian temple. You can almost picture it, can't you? The contrast between this wide-open, earthy field under the night sky and the enclosed, perhaps incense-filled space of a temple. But the two are intimately connected. The temple depends on the field. The field is, in a way, consecrated by its purpose for the temple. It's a loop, a cycle, just like the life cycle of the plant itself. We're going to trace that loop, step by painstaking step. This isn't going to be a fast-paced narrative. There are no chariot chases or dramatic pronouncements in the life of a barley stalk. It's slow, it's deliberate, it's governed by the sun and the rain and the quiet patience of the earth. And that's perfect for tonight, isn't it? We want to slow down, to let the mind quieten, to simply observe the ancient, repeating patterns of nature and human activity. Imagine the sheer scale of this operation. Fields like this, all across the empire, being cultivated to feed people, yes, but also to provide specific offerings, specific ingredients, for religious ceremonies that sought to maintain harmony with the divine, to ensure the continued prosperity of the land and its people. You can almost smell the dust, feel the dryness of the air. The sun, which was probably beating down relentlessly during the day, is now just a memory, replaced by the cool embrace of the night. And the barley stands sentinel, absorbing the moonlight, gathering its strength for another day of growth. It's easy to overlook the simple things, isn't it? We tend to focus on the kings, the battles, the grand monuments. But the vast majority of people in any ancient society were tied to the land, tied to the cycle of planting and harvest. Their lives, their beliefs, their rituals were deeply intertwined with the fate of crops like barley. It was the backbone of their existence. And this particular barley? It wasn't just destined for the communal bread oven. It was set aside, perhaps cultivated in a special plot, nurtured with extra care, because it was intended for a higher purpose. It was food for the gods, or perhaps a medium through which offerings were made, a way to connect the earthly realm with the spiritual. You look down at the faint outline of the plants near your feet, and they suddenly seem a little more significant, a little more mysterious. They are not just plants, they are potential offerings, vessels of sacred energy. The quiet of the field is profound. You can almost hear the silence, punctuated only by those natural sounds. It's a silence that has been here for thousands of years, witnessing empires rise and fall, technologies change, but the fundamental act of growth, of a seed becoming a plant, remaining constant. We're stepping into that constancy tonight, into that deep, patient rhythm. And as you stand here, feeling the earth beneath you, surrounded by the silent, growing barley, you begin to feel the immense weight of history, not as dates and names, but as the physical reality of life sustained by the soil. It's a grounding feeling, isn't it? Quite literally. Though I wouldn't recommend trying to sleep standing up in the middle of a field, ancient Persian or otherwise. That sounds like a recipe for mosquito bites and confused sheep. This is where it all begins. Not in the temple, not in the granary, but out here, under the open sky, with the seeds in the ground and the first tiny shoots pushing upwards. The story of barley in Persian temple rites is fundamentally a story of agriculture, of the relationship between people and the land, elevated to a spiritual plane. It's about the mundane becoming sacred, the simple act of growing food becoming an act of worship. And we are going to follow that transformation from the very first stirrings of life in the soil. You're standing here, feeling the cool earth underfoot, surrounded by barley, and it feels peaceful, secluded even. But this quiet field isn't isolated. It's a tiny, vital piece in the immense mosaic of one of the largest empires the ancient world had ever seen. We're talking about the Achaemenid Persian Empire, a sprawling realm that, at its height, stretched from parts of Europe and North Africa all the way to the Indus Valley in the east. Imagine that scale for a moment. From the Mediterranean coast to the borders of India, all under a single banner, albeit a banner flapping over a dizzying array of cultures, languages, and landscapes. This wasn't a quick flash-in-the-pan empire either. It endured for over 2 centuries, roughly from the mid-6th century BCE until Alexander the Great came marching through in the late 4th century BCE. That's a decent run, even by modern standards. Think about how much history unfolded within its borders. This vast empire, with its impressive palaces in Persepolis and Susa, its intricate network of roads facilitating rapid communication via messenger system, think ancient Pony Express, but probably more efficient, and less likely to lose your package, and its mighty armies, was fundamentally built on agriculture. You can't feed millions of people, sustain large armies, fund monumental building projects, or maintain a complex administrative structure without a reliable and abundant food supply. And in this part of the world, for a very, very long time, that meant grain. Wheat and, perhaps even more crucially, barley. So, the field you're standing in, quiet as it is tonight, represents the absolute cornerstone of this imperial power. It wasn't the gold in the treasuries, or the armies marching in lockstep, or even the impressive royal decrees etched onto stone tablets. It was the slow, steady, often back-breaking work of cultivating the land, coaxing life from the soil. This land, and countless acres like it across the empire, was the true wealth. When the harvests were good, the empire prospered. When they failed due to drought, disease, or conflict, the foundations of the empire would tremble. It's a simple equation, really, and one that governed the lives of something like 80 to 90% of the population who were tied directly to farming. Think about the logistics involved in this. Managing agricultural output over such a huge area required sophisticated administration. The Persians were surprisingly good at this. They had systems for surveying land, assessing yields, collecting taxes, often paid in kind, meaning in products like grain, and redistributing resources. They invested in infrastructure vital for agriculture, particularly irrigation systems in the drier regions. You might picture simple fields, but behind them was an empire-wide effort to manage water resources, qanats, which are underground tunnels that tap into groundwater and channel it over long distances while minimizing evaporation, were a Persian innovation that literally made vast areas bloom. Standing here, under the moonlight, you can almost imagine the network of these qanats running beneath the surface, silently feeding the roots of the barley. It's a hidden marvel of engineering, supporting the visible marvel of the growing crop. Historians still argue whether much of this agricultural land was owned directly by the crown, by powerful nobles, or by local communities and temples. It was likely a mix, with different arrangements in different regions, but the state certainly exerted control, demanding taxes and levies. And a portion of that produce, from specific, perhaps particularly fertile or ritually designated fields, was earmarked for the temples. This brings us back to our specific barley field. It wasn't just feeding the local populace or contributing to the general imperial tax revenue. This plot, or a collection of plots like it, was dedicated. Its yield was destined for the religious institutions, for the priests, for the ceremonies that were seen as equally vital to the empire's well-being as its armies or its granaries. The state religion, often associated with Zoroastrianism, though its exact nature during the Achaemenid period is another point historians love to debate, placed a high value on agricultural work. Tending the land, making it fertile, was considered a righteous act, a way of fighting back against the forces of decay and barrenness. So, cultivating this barley wasn't just a job, it was a spiritual undertaking, imbued with religious meaning. It's fascinating to think about how deeply intertwined the practical necessities of life were with spiritual beliefs. Growing food wasn't just about survival, it was about maintaining cosmic order. And this barley, destined for the temple, was at the nexus of that connection. It's a quirky thought, isn't it, that the fate of an empire could, in part, rest on the successful germination and growth of tiny barley seeds intended for offerings? You might be used to thinking of empires in terms of grand pronouncements and political maneuvering, but down here, at the ground level, it was all about making things grow. Imagine the daily rhythm of life in a place like this during the growing season. Waking with the sun, heading out to the fields, working the soil, managing the water, keeping watch for pests, all under the watchful eye of the sun, day after day. It's repetitive, it's demanding, but it's also deeply connected to the natural world in a way that's hard to replicate in our modern lives. You feel that connection just by standing here, the sheer scale of the earth, the sky, and the quiet presence of life pushing through the soil. You might swat at an imaginary fly, even though it's night, just from thinking about the daytime heat and the insects that would accompany it. Ah, the timeless struggle against things that buzz. The barley here feels special. It's not just common grain. It's been set apart. Maybe there was a specific ceremony when the field was designated for temple use, or maybe it was land that had belonged to the temple for generations. Regardless, its purpose elevated it. It wasn't just calories, it was sacred sustenance, a physical representation of the earth's bounty offered back to the divine forces that provided it. This field wasn't just producing food, it was producing holiness. And as you stand here, under the vast Persian sky, feeling the ancient rhythm of the land, you can almost sense that weight of purpose settling upon the quiet barley stalks. They are waiting for the next step in their journey, a journey that will take them from the humble field to the solemn inner chambers of a temple. You're still standing in this quiet field, the barley swaying gently in the subtle night breeze, feeling that sense of history layered beneath your feet. We've touched on how barley was the absolute bedrock of the Persian Empire's economy and sustenance, but let's dwell on the sheer versatility of this seemingly simple plant for a moment. It wasn't just a food, it was the food for many. Think of rice in parts of Asia, or potatoes in pre-famine Ireland. That level of fundamental importance. You could grind it into flour to make bread, the staff of life in so many cultures. Not necessarily the light, fluffy loaves you might be used to, but dense, nutritious bread, baked perhaps on hot stones or in simple ovens. Imagine the smell of that baking, a fundamental aroma of human civilization for millennia. Beyond bread, barley was often boiled into porridges or gruels. Simple, easy to prepare, and incredibly filling. This was probably the daily fare for most people, a hearty bowl of barley porridge to start the day, perhaps another in the evening. It provided the calories and nutrients needed for a life of hard physical labor, which was pretty much everyone's life unless you were royalty or a very high-ranking priest or official. It's a humbling thought, isn't it? That the complexity of an empire rested, in large part, on vast populations eating what we might consider basic gruel. But it worked. It fueled armies, built cities, and sustained entire families. And then there's the beverage side. Fermented barley, or beer. Evidence suggests that various forms of beer were consumed across the ancient Near East for thousands of years, and Persia was no exception. Barley beer wasn't just a casual drink, it could also be nutritious, a safer alternative to sometimes questionable water sources, and likely played a social and even religious role. You can almost picture workers sharing a drink after a long day in the fields, or perhaps a small amount being included in certain rituals. It's proof that even in the ancient world, people knew how to unwind, albeit with a beverage that might have been a bit thicker and cloudier than what you'd pour from a can today. Probably more like a liquid loaf of bread in a cup, honestly. Cheers to that. This widespread, indispensable use of barley, as bread, as porridge, as beer, is a mainstream historical fact you can take to the bank. If ancient Persian banks dealt in grain, which they probably did, actually. It was the caloric engine of the empire. But what gives it that surprising sacred edge we talked about? It goes beyond just being grateful for a good harvest, which is a common thread in agricultural societies. In the religious framework prevalent in ancient Persia, influenced by Zoroastrianism, the physical world was seen as a battleground between forces of good, associated with light, order, growth, fertility, and forces of bad, associated with darkness, decay, barrenness, stagnation. Working the land, making things grow, increasing fertility and abundance, was seen as actively participating on the side of good. It was a virtuous act, a way of strengthening the forces of life against the forces of death and decay. Barley, with its remarkable ability to germinate from a tiny seed, push through the soil, and produce a bounty of grain that could feed many, became a powerful symbol of this life force, of fertility, and of the triumph of growth over barrenness. It embodied the positive creative power inherent in the world. This wasn't just food, it was life made manifest in plant form. You can imagine ancient people looking at a field of ripe barley, golden in the sun, and seeing not just sustenance, but a tangible sign of the benevolent forces at work in the cosmos. This deep symbolic connection elevated barley beyond just a commodity. Certain varieties might have been seen as more pure, more potent, more suitable for sacred use. Specific fields, like the one you're standing in, might have been designated as holy ground, their produce reserved for the gods or for offerings. There's a quirky tidbit here. Some ancient texts from the wider Near East mention offerings of first fruits or particularly fine grain being presented to deities or rulers, signifying both gratitude and a hope for continued bounty. While specific details for Achaemenid Persia are sometimes harder to pin down compared to, say, Egypt or Mesopotamia, the underlying principle of offering the best of the harvest to secure divine favor was likely very much present. It makes sense, doesn't it? If you believe your gods are responsible for the harvest, you give them a cut, and you give them the good stuff. You wouldn't offer them the bruised, buggy kernels, would you? That seems like a quick way to incur divine displeasure, and honestly, who needs that? So, this barley isn't just growing, it's growing with purpose, imbued with symbolic weight. It represents life, fertility, abundance, and the victory of creation over destruction. When it's used in temple rites, it's not just an ingredient, it's a vessel of meaning, a physical link between the human realm and the divine. You can almost feel that energy humming in the quiet field around you, a sense of latent power contained within each stalk and grain. It's a powerful contrast to the simple, humble nature of the plant itself. From dirt and water, something sacred emerges. Historians still argue whether the Achaemenid state religion was purely Zoroastrianism or a more complex syncretic blend incorporating older Iranian beliefs and regional variations. But regardless of the exact theological details, the reverence for agriculture and for life-giving crops like barley appears to have been a consistent and central theme. This isn't just about pleasing a specific deity, it's about aligning oneself with the fundamental forces of goodness and creativity in the universe as they understood it. Standing here, feeling the dryness of the earth, the quiet presence of the growing plants, you can appreciate the depth of this connection. It's not just about farming, it's about cultivating the sacred. It's about seeing the divine not just in grand temples or cosmic bodies, but in the simple miracle of a seed bursting into life. This barley field is, in its own way, a sanctuary, a place where the potential for abundance in life is nurtured, preparing its yield for the even more formalized sacred spaces of the temple. It's a journey from the earth to the altar, a transformation of the mundane into the holy, powered by the sun, the rain, and the deep, rich symbolism of this remarkable grain. The quiet anticipation in the field feels palpable, as if the plants themselves are aware of their higher calling. You've been standing in that quiet field, feeling the connection to the earth and the growing barley, sensing its purpose. Now, let's shift our perspective, moving from the open sky and the rustling grain to a more contained, perhaps hushed space. Imagine yourself walking away from the field, leaving the moonlight behind, and approaching a structure that rises slightly from the surrounding landscape. It's not one of the massive, famous palaces you see in history books, built of polished stone on grand terraces. No, this is likely a local temple, perhaps serving a nearby village or a specific agricultural district. It's built of sturdy, sun-dried mud brick, maybe with stone foundations or lintels, designed to blend into the landscape rather than dominate it entirely. The entrance might be simple, a shadowed doorway inviting you into a cooler, quieter space. You step inside, leaving the world of sun, soil, and wind behind. The air is different here. Cooler, stiller, perhaps carrying the faint, lingering scent of ashes, dried herbs, or something subtly sweet like old incense. Your eyes adjust to the dimmer light, which might filter in through small openings high in the walls or from an open central courtyard. The sounds of the outside world fade, replaced by a profound silence, broken only by your own quiet movements or perhaps the distant shuffle of feet. This is a place set apart, a sanctuary. The layout might be simple. Maybe a central room with an altar, or a series of interconnected chambers designed for specific ritual purposes. There might be niches in the walls holding small statues or sacred objects, though ancient Persian temples often emphasized fire altars over elaborate imagery. You see areas that look like they are for storage, maybe large clay jars for liquids, or spaces where baskets and sacks could be kept. This isn't just a place of abstract worship, it's a practical hub, a place where offerings are brought and sometimes processed or stored. The function of this temple is multifaceted, a mainstream historical fact across many ancient cultures, including Persia. It serves as a focal point for religious life in the community. People would come here to make offerings, to participate in ceremonies, to seek divine favor. It's a place of prayer and ritual, designed to maintain harmony with the divine forces that govern the world. These forces, in the context of ancient Persian belief, included powerful entities associated with light, truth, order, and creation, like Ahura Mazda, the wise lord. The rituals performed here were aimed at strengthening these benevolent forces and warding off the destructive ones. But the temple wasn't just a spiritual center, it was also often an economic entity. Temples frequently owned land, received substantial offerings of produce, like our barley, livestock, and other goods. This made them significant landowners and economic players in their own right. The storage areas you see aren't just for show, they hold the accumulated wealth and resources of the temple, which could be used to support the priests, maintain the structure, or even redistribute to the community during times of need, perhaps like an ancient, religiously affiliated food bank. Historians still argue whether the economic power of temples sometimes rivaled or even challenged that of the secular state in certain periods. It's a fascinating debate: who really held the power, the king with his armies, or the priests with their control over spiritual matters and considerable material wealth? And who are the people who inhabit this quiet space, who conduct the rituals and manage the temple's affairs? These are the priests. They are the intermediaries between the human and the divine, the keepers of ancient knowledge and sacred practices. They dedicate their lives to serving the temple and its patrons. You might see them moving quietly through the chambers, perhaps wearing simple robes made of linen or wool, their movements deliberate and focused. Their lives are governed by routine, by the cycles of the religious calendar, and by the requirements of ritual purity. Maintaining purity was a big deal for the priests. It wasn't just about physical cleanliness, though that was certainly part of it. It was about ritual purity, avoiding contamination from things considered impure, which could range from certain bodily emissions to contact with dead matter. There's a quirky tidbit here. Some ancient Persian texts hint at very specific rules regarding priestly hygiene and diet before participating in important ceremonies, sometimes requiring periods of abstinence or special purification rituals. Imagine having to follow a super strict pre-ceremony checklist, not just about what you do, but what you ate or touched for days beforehand. It adds a whole new level of complexity to getting ready for work. Did I remember to wash my hands in exactly this type of water? Did I accidentally step on an ant this morning? The stakes were high. The priests would oversee the preparation and use of the offerings, including the carefully grown and harvested barley from fields like the one we just visited. They would perform the specific rites associated with agriculture, fertility, and thanksgiving, ensuring that the cycle of planting and harvest continued successfully year after year. They would understand the symbolism inherent in the barley, its connection to life and creation, and incorporate that into their prayers and actions. Their knowledge wasn't just theological, it likely included practical understanding of the agricultural calendar, perhaps even advising on auspicious times for planting or harvesting. They were spiritual guides, yes, but also deeply connected to the physical realities of the world that sustained them and the community. You stand in the quiet temple, feeling the stillness, the weight of centuries of ritual and prayer. This is where the barley's journey culminates, where it is transformed from sustenance for the body into an offering for the spirit. The contrast between the vast, open field and this enclosed, sacred space is striking, but the connection is clear. One provides the raw material, the other provides the context and the purpose. The priests bridge that gap, bringing the bounty of the earth into the presence of the divine. Think about their days. Waking before dawn, performing morning ablutions, perhaps tending the sacred fire that might burn constantly on the altar, reciting prayers and hymns. Then overseeing the daily activities of the temple, receiving visitors, accepting offerings, managing the stores of grain and other goods. In the evening, more prayers and rituals. Their lives were disciplined, focused on their sacred duties. They were the guardians of tradition, ensuring that the ancient rites were performed correctly, maintaining the delicate balance between the human world and the divine. The air here feels heavy with that history, with the countless repetitions of ritual, the silent passage of time measured not by clocks, but by the rising and setting of the sun and the turning of the agricultural seasons. This temple, though perhaps humble in its construction compared to the royal centers, is a vital node in the network of Persian society and belief. It is where the physical world meets the spiritual, where the bounty of the land is consecrated, and where the vital connection between humanity and the creative forces of the cosmos is maintained. And the barley, patiently growing in the fields outside, is destined for this very place, for these very rituals, completing its life cycle in service of something larger than itself. We've been in the quiet temple, feeling the stillness and the weight of ritual, but now we need to go back outside, back to the earth, because the barley's journey begins not within walls, but out in the open, under the sun. Imagine leaving the cool dimness of the temple and stepping back into the bright light, perhaps on a crisp autumn day, or maybe early spring, depending on the local climate and planting cycle. The air is fresh, carrying the scent of turned earth. You are now standing not just in a field, but in the field, the one specifically designated for growing this sacred barley. It might be marked in some way, perhaps with boundary stones or even a small shrine at its edge, setting it apart from the surrounding farmland. The very first step in the life cycle of the temple barley, long before a seed even touches the soil, is the selection and preparation of the plot itself. This wasn't a casual decision. The land had to be suitable, fertile, with good drainage and access to water, especially in a region prone to dryness. But beyond the practical agricultural concerns, this land had a ritual significance. It was chosen, perhaps even consecrated, as the ground that would nurture the sacred grain. This act of selecting the plot wasn't just agricultural planning, It was the first move in a year-long ritual process. Think about the ground beneath your feet. It looks like just dirt, but it's alive with microorganisms, packed with the potential to support life. To prepare it for planting, it needed to be worked. This meant plowing. Picture a scene that has remained largely unchanged for millennia until very recently in human history. An animal, probably an ox or a pair of oxen, yoked together, slowly pulling a simple plow through the soil. The plowshare, made of wood hardened by fire or perhaps tipped with bronze or iron if they were lucky, cuts into the earth, turning over the soil, burying weeds, and breaking up clumps. You can almost hear the sounds, the rhythmic creak of the wooden yoke, the lowing of the oxen, the shuffling footsteps of the farmer or temple attendant guiding the plow, the tearing sound as the earth is turned over. It's a slow, deliberate process, line after line, back and forth across the field. It's hard work, physically demanding, requiring strength, patience, and skill to guide the animals and keep the furrows straight. Imagine the farmer gripping the handles, feeling the resistance of the soil, the power of the animals pulling. It connects you directly to the earth in a very primal way. This act of plowing wasn't just about preparing a seedbed, it was often imbued with symbolic meaning. It was about opening the earth, preparing it to receive the seed, making it fertile. In many ancient cultures, the earth was seen as a feminine principle, a nurturing mother, and the act of plowing could carry connotations of preparing her to be fertilized by the seed. While specific details for a Achaemenid practice are sometimes murky, the universal significance of breaking and turning the soil to coax forth life would have been well understood. Before or during the plowing, there might have been a specific ritual preparation of the soil. This is where the quirky tidbits start to emerge, though details from ancient Persia are less documented than, say, Roman agricultural rites. But drawing on broader Near Eastern practices and general principles of ancient religion, it's highly likely that priests or temple attendants would have performed some kind of ceremony over the land. This could involve prayers to benevolent deities associated with fertility and agriculture, perhaps offering libations, pouring out liquids like water, milk, or a simple fermented drink onto the newly turned earth, or burying small symbolic items in the furrows. Historians still argue whether these specific pre-planting rituals were uniform across the vast Persian Empire or varied significantly from region to region. Given the diversity of cultures within the empire, regional variations seem probable, but the core idea of ritually preparing the land for a sacred purpose would likely have been consistent for temple fields. The purpose of these rituals was to purify the land, bless it, and invoke divine favor for a bountiful harvest. It was an appeal to the powers that be, asking them to smile upon this field and ensure the seeds would germinate and grow strong. It's like putting out a cosmic help wanted, bumper crop edition sign. You can imagine a priest, perhaps in simple ritual attire, walking slowly behind the plow, chanting prayers, sprinkling purifying water or another substance onto the freshly turned soil. The air might be filled with the murmur of ancient words, mixing with the sounds of the animals and the plow. It's a blend of the intensely practical and the deeply spiritual. The farmer is doing the physical work, the priest is doing the spiritual work, both aiming for the same goal, a successful, sacred harvest. This initial preparation of the plot is a critical first step. It sets the stage for the entire process. The land is not just prepared for agriculture, it is consecrated for sacred agriculture. It becomes a special place, distinct from ordinary fields. Standing here, you can almost feel that distinction, a subtle difference in the air, a sense of purpose that goes beyond mere sustenance. The earth feels ready, waiting. It has been opened, cleansed, and blessed, prepared to receive the precious seeds that will continue the cycle of life and provide the material for sacred offerings. This blend of practical farming techniques, plowing, selecting good land, with ritual actions, consecration, prayer, offerings to the soil, is a fascinating aspect of ancient agricultural societies. They didn't see a strict separation between the physical and the spiritual. The success of the harvest depended on both getting the farming right and getting the gods on your side. You couldn't just plow, you had to plow ritually. You couldn't just plant, you had to plant prayerfully. It was a holistic approach to life and agriculture, where every step had both a practical function and a deeper meaning. As the sun begins to set, casting long shadows across the newly plowed furrows, you can feel the quiet anticipation in the air. The land is ready. The first stage of the barley's sacred journey is complete, a foundation of prepared and consecrated earth laid down, waiting for the next step, the arrival and planting of the seeds themselves. The oxen are probably resting, the plow left idle until the next morning. The field is quiet once more, but it's a different kind of quiet than before. It's a quiet full of potential, of readiness. It's ready to receive life. The field has been selected, the earth turned and ritually prepared, lying in expectant furrows under the Persian sky. Now comes a moment of profound importance, the choosing of the seeds. This isn't just grabbing any old handful of barley grain from last year's harvest. For the sacred temple barley, the seeds were likely selected with meticulous care. Think of it like choosing the finest ingredients for a very important recipe. You wouldn't use wilted vegetables or stale spices, would you? You want the best. The selection process probably involved examining the harvested grain from the previous season, looking for the plumpest, healthiest-looking kernels. Seeds that were unbroken, free from blemishes, pests, or signs of disease. You'd want the ones that felt heavy in your hand, promising vigor and strong growth. This wasn't just about aesthetics, it was practical. Healthier seeds are more likely to germinate successfully and produce robust plants, leading to a better harvest. But for temple barley, this practical concern was overlaid with ritual significance. Using the best seeds was a sign of respect, an offering of quality before the planting even began. It was about ensuring that the lineage of the sacred barley was pure and strong, carrying the potential for life in its most vital form. This idea of selecting seeds based on quality and perhaps even lineage or source is a fascinating aspect of ancient agriculture and ritual. Some societies had specific strains of grain reserved for ceremonial purposes, seeds passed down through generations, imbued with history and sacred energy. While direct evidence for such strict lineage tracking in Achaemenid temple barley is, again, a point historians might debate, they do love a good debate, those historians. The principle of using particularly fine or set-aside seeds for sacred purposes aligns with broader ancient practices. It wouldn't be surprising if the temple maintained its own stores of seed grain, carefully preserved from the best of each harvest, ensuring a continuity of quality and sacred association. Imagine a dimly lit storage room within the temple walls, filled with large ceramic jars or woven baskets holding these precious seeds, guarded carefully until the time for planting arrived. Before these chosen seeds were entrusted to the earth, they likely underwent their own form of consecration. This is another point where specific details from ancient Persia are less abundant than we might wish, but drawing on parallels from contemporary cultures and the general nature of ancient ritual, it's highly probable. The seeds might be brought into the temple or placed on a temporary altar in the field. Priests would perform ceremonies over them, perhaps sprinkling them with purifying water, chanting blessings, or offering prayers asking for successful germination, protection from pests, and a bountiful yield. This initial seed consecration wasn't just a symbolic gesture, it was seen as actively imbuing the seeds with sacred power, preparing them for their sacred task. It was like giving them a divine send-off before they began their underground journey. You can picture the scene, the chosen seeds, perhaps spread out on a clean cloth or held in a ceremonial bowl, surrounded by priests murmuring ancient words, the air thick with quiet reverence. The focus is entirely on these small, powerful kernels, each one holding the potential for dozens, even hundreds, of new grains. It's a moment of intense focus on the promise of life contained within something so small. There might even have been specific prayers or hymns dedicated to the spirit of the barley, acknowledging its life force and its role in sustaining both human life and the spiritual realm. This reflects a worldview where nature is not just a collection of inert resources, but a living, interconnected system, imbued with divine presence. The barley wasn't just an object, it had a form of sacred life. This step, the selection and consecration of the seed, underscores the importance of beginnings. Just as the prepared field is the foundation, the quality and blessing of the seed are crucial for everything that follows. It's a reminder that even the grandest outcomes often start with something small and seemingly insignificant. A tiny seed, carefully chosen, blessed, and placed in the earth, holds within it the potential for a temple offering that could, in the eyes of the ancient Persians, help maintain cosmic order and ensure the prosperity of the entire empire. No pressure, little seed. Historians still argue whether the specific variety of barley used for temple rites differed significantly from the barley grown for common consumption. It's plausible that certain landraces were favored for their perceived purity, yield, or symbolic associations, but definitively identifying them thousands of years later is challenging. However, the ritual separation and special handling of the seeds for sacred purposes is the key takeaway. It's the intent and the process that makes this barley distinct, right from the very start. As you imagine the sun warming the earth, feel the texture of the selected seeds in your imagined hand, smooth, hard, waiting. They are not just seeds, they are the next generation of sacred barley, carrying the potential of the previous harvest and the hopes for the next. They have been blessed, set apart, ready to be placed in the waiting earth. This moment, before the planting begins, feels charged with anticipation, with the promise of life and growth waiting to unfold. The journey is about to move into the next phase, from preparation and selection to the act of entrusting the seed to the soil. It's a quiet, profound transition, steeped in ancient practice and belief. The field waits, the seeds are ready, and the timeless act of planting is about to begin. The seeds are chosen, blessed, waiting. The field is plowed, prepared, waiting. But you don't just plant whenever you feel like it, especially not sacred temple barley in ancient Persia. Oh no, timing was everything. And this wasn't just about avoiding frost or planting before the dry season hit, though those practical considerations were absolutely vital. This was about aligning the planting with the cosmic rhythms, ensuring that the seeds were placed in the earth at the most auspicious moment, determined by the movements of the moon and the stars. Imagine standing in the field again, but this time it's perhaps dawn, or twilight, or even deep in the night. The air is cool and still. You're looking up at the sky, not just admiring the stars, but reading them. Ancient peoples were far more attuned to the celestial cycles than most of us are today. The position of certain constellations, the phase of the moon, these weren't just pretty sights, they were calendars, clocks, and cosmic indicators. Farmers and priests alike would have possessed a sophisticated understanding of these celestial movements, not necessarily through complex mathematical calculations we'd recognize, but through generations of careful observation and accumulated knowledge. Determining the exact timing for planting the sacred barley was likely the domain of the priests, or perhaps specific temple officials who were also astronomers or astrologers. The lines between these disciplines were often blurred back then. They would consult their knowledge, perhaps referring to ancient texts or observations recorded over years, to identify the most favorable day and time. This is a mainstream historical fact. Ancient societies across the globe used celestial events to guide agricultural practices, believing that the heavens influenced earthly affairs. The moon's phases, for instance, were widely believed to impact plant growth, the waxing moon associated with increasing vitality, the waning moon with decline. Planting seeds intended for powerful, life-affirming rituals under the right moon phase would have been crucial. So, the signal is given. The auspicious moment has arrived. You might see temple attendants, perhaps the same people who helped prepare the field, gathering with baskets or sacks containing the consecrated seeds. The mood is likely solemn, focused. This is not hurried work, it's a measured, deliberate action. The actual act of sowing could be done in a couple of ways. One common method was broadcasting, walking across the field with a container of seeds and scattering them by hand in a wide arc. Imagine the gesture, a rhythmic swing of the arm, the seeds flying through the air and landing on the prepared soil. It takes practice to broadcast evenly, ensuring the seeds aren't too clumped together in one spot or too sparse in others. Alternatively, especially for precious, sacred seeds on a dedicated plot, they might have been placed more carefully, perhaps dropped by hand directly into the furrows created by the plow. This would be slower, more controlled, ensuring each seed had its best chance to germinate. You can almost feel the small, hard seeds between your fingers, feel the texture of the soil as you crouch down to place them gently in the earth. It's an intimate act, entrusting the potential for life to the soil. The air might be cool and damp with morning dew or the evening air, carrying that rich, earthy smell of freshly turned soil. As the planting takes place, whether by broadcasting or careful placement, it's highly probable that accompanying chants or prayers were performed. These weren't just songs to pass the time, they were integral parts of the ritual. The chants would likely invoke the benevolent deities associated with agriculture, fertility, and the life force. They would ask for the seeds to germinate successfully, for the plants to be strong and healthy, for protection from pests and disease, and for a bountiful harvest that would be pleasing to the divine forces. The voices of the planters or accompanying priests would rise and fall in rhythmic patterns, blending with the quiet sounds of the field, perhaps the distant call of a bird, or the gentle rustle of leaves on nearby trees. There's a quirky tidbit related to ancient sowing practices. In some cultures, certain sounds, or even specific actions were believed to encourage germination or ward off evil spirits that might harm the seeds. This could range from making noise, to scare away pests, real or supernatural, to following very specific patterns of movement across the field. While we don't have a detailed manual for Achaemenid sacred barley planting rituals, alas, wouldn't that be a fascinating read? It's easy to imagine similar beliefs being part of the practice. Maybe there was a specific chant sequence that was believed to make the seeds listen to the earth, or a certain way of holding your hand while scattering them. You can almost hear a wise old farmer giving instructions. No, not like that. You've got to persuade the seed. Historians still argue whether the specific content of these agricultural chants was uniform across the Persian Empire or if they incorporated local deities and traditions alongside the overarching, Zoroastrian-influenced beliefs. Given the vastness and diversity of the empire, a degree of regional variation seems likely, with local priests adapting the core rituals to their specific context. But the core purpose, to sacralize the act of planting and invoke divine aid, would have been universal for temple barley. You feel the quiet intensity of the moment. Each seed placed in the earth feels significant. This isn't just farming, it's an act of faith, a partnership between human effort and divine power. The sun might be just beginning to peek over the horizon, or the moon might be high in the sky. It's like casting long, ethereal shadows. The air is cool, carrying the damp smell of soil and the faint sound of chanting. The repetitive motion of sowing, combined with the rhythmic prayers, creates a meditative atmosphere. It's work, yes, but it's also worship. Think about the trust involved. You are placing tiny, vulnerable seeds into the dark earth, hoping they will somehow find the strength to break through and reach for the light. It requires patience and a deep understanding of the natural world, combined with a profound belief in the unseen forces that govern it. The future harvest, the success of the temple rituals, the well-being of the community, all of it rests, in part, on this quiet act of planting, performed at the right time, with the right intent, and with the right words. As the last seeds are sown and covered gently with soil, a sense of completion settles over the field. The immediate task is done. The seeds are in the earth, nestled in the dark, waiting for the warmth and moisture they need to awaken. The chants fade into the morning air or the twilight stillness. You look out over the newly planted field, which might look deceptively empty to the untrained eye. But you know better. Beneath the surface, thousands of tiny points of potential life are resting, waiting for their moment to begin their upward journey. The ancient rhythm of growth has been initiated once more, guided by the stars and blessed by human intention and prayer. The quiet waiting game begins. The seeds are in the earth. The chants have faded. The field, which moments ago felt alive with the quiet intensity of planting, settles into a different kind of silence, one of waiting. You stand looking out over the seemingly bare soil, the furrows neatly drawn, but the life you know is there remains hidden. This is the crucial period underground, where the magic, or rather, the biological miracle, happens. The seed, nestled in the dark, begins to awaken. It starts with moisture. The seed absorbs water from the surrounding soil, swelling slightly. This hydration triggers a cascade of biochemical processes within the tiny kernel. Stored energy, locked away as starch, begins to be broken down into sugars, providing the fuel for growth. A tiny root, called the radicle, is usually the first to emerge, pushing downwards into the soil, seeking anchorage and more water. This is the plant's lifeline, its connection to the earth's sustenance. Simultaneously, a shoot, the coleoptile, begins to grow upwards, a pale, delicate spear pushing towards the light. This stage, happening entirely beneath your feet, is one of profound vulnerability. The seed has committed its stored energy to germination. It needs to establish roots and break the surface quickly to begin photosynthesizing and producing its own energy. If the soil is too dry, the seed won't hydrate properly and will die. If it's too wet, it might rot or be susceptible to fungal diseases. If the temperature isn't right, germination will fail. Pests in the soil, insects, grubs, could feast on the vulnerable sprout before it even sees the light of day. It's a tense time, a hidden struggle for survival happening silently beneath the quiet surface of the field. You find yourself scanning the earth, looking for the first signs. How long does it take? Days, perhaps a week or two, depending on the temperature and moisture levels. It feels like an eternity of waiting. And then, one morning, or perhaps in the soft light of evening, you see it. A tiny, almost imperceptible lift in the soil surface. And then, pushing through, a delicate, pale green tip. The first sprout. It's a moment of quiet triumph, a promise fulfilled. This is the first green whisper, the barley plant announcing its arrival in the world above ground. As more and more sprouts emerge, the field begins to change color. The uniform brown of the soil is gradually replaced by a faint, then increasingly noticeable, wash of green. It's a beautiful transformation, a sign that the planting was successful, that the seeds were viable, and that the earth has accepted its charge. This monitoring of the early emergence and growth was a mainstream historical fact, a fundamental part of farming everywhere. Ancient farmers, including those tending temple fields, would walk their land regularly, observing the progress, checking for gaps where seeds failed to germinate, looking for signs of trouble. Their experienced eyes could read the health of the nascent crop and the color and density of the young sprouts. An even, vibrant green carpet meant things were going well. Patchy emergence or yellowish sprouts were cause for concern. This early stage is still incredibly vulnerable. The tiny plants are fragile, easily damaged. A sudden heavy downpour could wash them away or waterlog the soil. A dry spell now, before the roots are well established, could be devastating. Pests above ground, like birds or insects, could feed on the tender shoots. This was a period requiring constant vigilance from the people tending the field. They would need to watch the weather anxiously, check the soil moisture, and look for any signs of damage or disease. Managing these early threats without modern pesticides or sophisticated tools required ingenuity and experience. Farmers might try to scare away birds, perhaps by shouting or waving objects. They might use simple barriers or deterrents if certain pests were a recurring problem, though effective broad-scale pest control was incredibly challenging. Irrigation, if available, would be critical during dry periods, providing the much-needed water for the thirsty young roots and shoots. This would involve diverting water from streams or canets, remember those underground tunnels, and channeling it carefully through the field, a delicate operation to ensure the young plants were watered but not drowned. There's a quirky or perhaps slightly fringed tidbit here related to ancient beliefs about protecting young crops. In some agricultural societies, sympathetic magic or specific rituals were performed at this vulnerable stage to protect the sprouts. This could involve making offerings to protective spirits, creating talismans, or performing actions intended to mimic strength and resilience for the plants. For example, one might carry strong, healthy objects through the field or perform chants intended to ward off evil influences believed to cause blight or pest infestations. While concrete evidence for specific Achaemenid rituals at this exact sprout stage is sparse, the general principle of seeking divine or magical protection for vulnerable crops was widespread in the ancient world. You can imagine priests or farmers walking the field at dawn, murmuring protective verses over the tiny green shoots, asking for divine shielding against the myriad dangers they faced. Historians still argue whether the level of care and specific protective rituals applied to temple-designated fields differed significantly in intensity or type compared to regular communal fields. Was the sacred barley given preferential treatment, perhaps receiving more consistent irrigation, more careful weeding, done by hand, of course, back then, or more elaborate protective ceremonies? It seems logical that a crop destined for sacred use would receive extra attention, but definitively proving a widespread, standardized difference in practices across the empire is difficult due to the patchy nature of historical records. However, the intent to protect this valuable and ritually important crop would undoubtedly have been high. As you watch the field gradually turn green, you feel a sense of quiet satisfaction. The first hurdle has been cleared. The seeds have germinated, the sprouts have emerged, pushing their way into the light and air. They are still small, still fragile, but they are here. They have embarked on their journey. Each tiny green shoot represents a successful act of creation, a victory of life over the potential for decay. They are like tiny, hopeful exclamation points scattered across the brown earth. This stage, from hidden seed to visible sprout, is a period of immense transformation, driven by the inherent life force within the seed and nurtured by the earth and the sun. It's a quiet process, often overlooked in the grand sweep of history, but it was fundamental to ancient life. Without the successful emergence of these countless tiny sprouts, there would be no harvest, no food, no offerings, no continuation of the cycle. The first green whisper is not just a sound, it's a sign of life, a breath of promise across the land, the quiet confirmation that the journey of the sacred barley is well and truly underway. The vulnerability remains, but so does the hope. The field is now officially growing. You've seen the first green whispers break the soil, a fragile promise emerging from the dark earth. Now, those tiny sprouts are growing. They're reaching upwards, unfurling more leaves, putting down deeper roots. The field is no longer just brown earth with speckles of green, it's becoming a carpet, thicker by the day, of vibrant young barley plants. They look so full of life, so hopeful. But this stage of growth is still fraught with peril. It's a constant battle against the elements and a host of natural adversaries who also happen to think barley is quite a tasty idea. Nurturing this growth requires tireless effort. The sun, so vital for photosynthesis, can also be a relentless enemy, beating down and drying out the soil alarmingly quickly. This is where water becomes absolutely critical. In many parts of the Persian Empire, especially the drier regions where agriculture flourished only with human intervention, irrigation wasn't just helpful, it was the difference between life and death for the crop. Remember those cannots we talked about? Those ingenious underground channels that brought water from distant sources? This is where that investment pays off. Directing that water from the cannon output or a stream into the field, and then channeling it carefully among the rows of young barley plants, was a skilled and labor-intensive task. You had to build small earth banks and ditches to guide the flow, ensuring every part of the field got enough water but wasn't flooded. Too much water could be just as damaging as too little, leading to root rot or creating conditions ripe for fungal diseases. Imagine spending hours under the hot sun, shovel in hand, directing water flow, constantly adjusting the simple earth channels. It's patient, demanding work, a constant negotiation with the land and the water. The sheer importance of irrigation to ancient Persian agriculture is a mainstream historical fact. Without it, vast areas of the empire would have been barren. But water management is only one battle. The plants also faced threats from creatures who saw them as a ready meal. Insects, in their myriad forms, could chew leaves, bore into stalks, or damage the developing grain heads. Birds might swoop down to eat seeds or young sprouts. Small mammals could nibble at the base of the plants. And then there were the invisible enemies, plant diseases, caused by fungi, bacteria, or viruses, that could wither a healthy field in days. Fighting these pests and diseases without the benefit of modern chemical pesticides was a never-ending struggle. It relied on observation, preventative measures, and sheer manual labor. You'd spend your days walking the field, scanning the plants. See a cluster of beetles? You'd pick them off by hand and maybe crush them. Notice leaves being eaten? You'd try to find the culprit. It sounds tedious, and it absolutely was. Imagine handpicking bugs off thousands upon thousands of barley stalks. It gives organic farming a whole new, exhausting meaning. Sometimes, people might try using smoke or strong-smelling plant concoctions to deter pests, but their effectiveness was limited and often localized. Weeding was another major task. Unwanted plants compete with the barley for water, nutrients, and sunlight. They had to be pulled up by hand, root and all. Trudging through the rows, bending over or squatting for hours, pulling weeds, it's monotonous, back-breaking work. You might find yourself daydreaming about literally anything else. Like, wouldn't it be great if there was some magical spray that just knew which plants were supposed to be here and which weren't? Alas, you're thousands of years too early for that particular miracle. This constant vigilance and manual intervention were vital for the survival and health of the crop. Temple fields, being particularly valuable, likely received meticulous attention from assigned attendants and perhaps even priests themselves involved in overseeing the process. Their well-being, and the success of the temple's operations, depended on this harvest, giving them extra motivation to fight tooth and nail against anything that threatened it. There's a quirky tidbit here related to ancient pest control beyond the purely physical methods. Some ancient agricultural texts from the wider region mention using rituals, incantations, or specific symbolic actions to ward off pests or plant diseases, believing these afflictions were sometimes caused by malevolent spirits or divine displeasure. This could involve burying certain objects in the field, performing chants aimed at repelling harmful influences, or even enacting symbolic dramas representing the victory of the healthy plant over its adversaries. While we don't have detailed scripts for Achaemenid barley-saving rituals, again, my kingdom for an ancient Persian farming manual. It's plausible that such practices were part of the temple's approach to protecting its sacred crop, blending practical effort with spiritual defense. It's like, okay, we've handpicked the beetles, now let's try this ancient anti-blight chant just in case. Can't hurt, right? Historians still argue whether these ritualistic pest control methods were genuinely believed to be effective on their own, or if they were primarily psychological tools, bolstering the morale of the farmers and providing a sense of agency in the face of uncontrollable natural forces. Or perhaps they were simply performed alongside practical methods as a standard part of engaging with the divine forces perceived to influence the harvest. It's hard to know definitively how much faith was placed in the magic versus the manual labor. As you look out over the field, seeing the green carpet thickening, you appreciate the immense effort that has gone into getting it this far. The constant watering, the endless weeding, the battle against every bug and disease that tries to get a foothold. It's a testament to human perseverance and the deep connection between the people and the land. The barley plants, strong enough now to stand against a gentle breeze, are a visible result of that effort, coupled with the benevolent forces of nature and, perhaps, the efficacy of those ancient prayers and rituals. They are past the most fragile sprout stage, gaining height and strength, but the journey is far from over. They still need water, protection, and time under the sun to mature. The fight against the elements is a daily reality, a quiet, ongoing struggle that defines much of the growing season. But with each passing day, the plants grow taller, the stalks stronger, reaching towards the sky, preparing for the next crucial phase of their life cycle, the phase where they begin to form the very reason for their existence, the grain itself. The air hums not just with insects, but with the quiet tension of growth and the ever-present need to defend the precious crop. You've watched the young barley plants battle against thirst and pests, surviving the initial, incredibly vulnerable stages. Now, if the conditions are right, enough water, sufficient sunlight, not too many hungry bugs, something remarkable happens. The plants enter a phase of rapid, almost explosive growth. It's as if all that energy they've been gathering, all those nutrients pulled from the soil, suddenly gets channeled into shooting upwards. Imagine standing in the field again, and you can almost see the difference day by day. Those ankle-high sprouts you saw earlier are now reaching towards your knees, then your waist, and eventually, possibly even higher, depending on the variety of barley and the specific growing conditions. The stalks are elongating quickly, thickening, developing the internal structure they need to support the weight they will eventually bear. This isn't just a slow crawl, it's a noticeable ascent, a determined push towards the sky. The field transforms visually. It changes from a low-lying green carpet to a much taller, denser stand of vegetation. The individual plants are less distinct, they blend together into a sea of swaying green stalks. When the wind blows, it creates mesmerizing waves that ripple across the field, a beautiful, living testament to their vigor. You can almost hear the collective sigh of the plants as they stretch upwards, feeling the sun on their lengthening leaves. It's during this phase that the barley develops its full height and creates the framework for the coming grain. This rapid growth requires a lot of resources, particularly water and nutrients from the soil. The extensive root system that developed earlier now works tirelessly to draw up everything the plant needs. This is why the continued management of irrigation, which we talked about earlier, remains so important. A dry spell during this growth spurt could stunt the plants permanently, reducing the final yield. So, the quiet work of channeling water, day after day, is still a crucial part of the picture. As the stalks gain height and strength, they also begin to prepare for their ultimate purpose, producing grain. At the top of each stalk, something new starts to form. Initially, it might just look like a thickening or swelling at the very tip. But gradually, it takes shape, developing into the characteristic barley head. This head is essentially a cluster of flowers, which will eventually be pollinated. Barley is mostly self-pollinating, which simplifies things a bit compared to crops that rely heavily on insects or wind from distant plants, thankfully. Less worrying about whether the bees are having a good day. As the head develops, the individual florets within it swell and differentiate, eventually forming the kernels of grain. At this stage, the heads are green and relatively small, often tucked close to the stalk. They are the promise of the future harvest, still developing, still vulnerable. You can walk through the field and gently touch the developing heads, feeling their firmness, seeing the tiny beginnings of the rows of grain kernels forming. It's a tactile connection to the plant's progress, a feeling of the potential waiting within. The successful formation of these heads, packed with developing kernels, is a critical milestone. It signifies that the plant has successfully navigated the challenges of early growth and is now directing its energy towards reproduction and yield. This development of the grain heads was a keenly watched event for ancient farmers. It was a visible sign that the season was progressing well and that a harvest was on the horizon. The expectation must have been immense, the entire next year's sustenance and the possibility of temple offerings literally hanging in the balance, developing at the top of each stalk. A mainstream historical fact is that various ancient cultures had specific festivals or rituals celebrating the formation of the grain heads or the ripening of the crops. These first fruits type celebrations acknowledged the bounty that was developing and expressed hope for a successful harvest. While specific details for Achaemenid Persia might be less clear-cut than, say, harvest festivals in ancient Greece or Rome, it's highly probable that the priests and community associated with this temple would have marked this phase with some form of gratitude or petitionary ritual, perhaps offering prayers for the heads to fill fully and ripen well. There's a quirky tidbit related to this stage. In some ancient agricultural beliefs, the developing grain head was seen as embodying the spirit of the plant or the fertility of the field. Sometimes rituals involved placing offerings among the growing stalks or performing actions intended to encourage the heads to swell and become heavy with grain, perhaps involving symbolic weight or fullness. Imagine priests walking through the field, carrying heavy stones or baskets overflowing with earlier produce, perhaps chanting, in a form of sympathetic magic intended to make the barley heads similarly heavy and full. It sounds a bit like wishing really hard at your vegetables, but in a ritualistic, ancient way. Historians still argue whether the degree to which specific, anthropomorphic grain spirits were a focus of worship in Achaemenid Persia, compared to broader reverence for the forces of fertility and growth. Some scholars point to evidence of localized agricultural deities or spirits in regions that became part of the empire, while others emphasize the more abstract, cosmic dualism of Zoroastrianism influencing all aspects of life, including agriculture. It's difficult to know definitively what exactly the priests and farmers were picturing or addressing when they performed rituals over the developing crop. As you walk among the tall, green stalks, feeling the gentle brush of the developing heads against your hands, you sense the plant's strength and resilience. It has grown from a tiny seed into a substantial plant, capable of supporting the weight of the future grain. The air is filled with the rustle of leaves and the quiet promise contained within each green head. The work of nurturing continues, warding off late-season pests, ensuring adequate water if needed, praying for good weather, but there's a sense of progress, of moving towards the culmination of the growing season. The stalks reach skyward, a green army standing tall in the field, a testament to the earth's fertility, human effort, and perhaps divine blessing. They have overcome the challenges of emergence and early vulnerability. Now, they are focused entirely on the task of creating the grain, packing each head with the potential for future life, future sustenance, and future sacred offerings. The field feels alive with energy, a quiet powerhouse of growth. The journey from seed to sustenance is entering its final phases, preparing for the golden transformation to come. You've seen the stalks stretch skyward, the green heads beginning to form at their tips. Now comes a magical, alchemical transformation, powered by the sun itself. This is the phase where the barley ripens. The green stalks and heads gradually begin to change color, transitioning from vibrant green to shades of yellow, then gold, and finally a rich, sun-bleached brown. The heads, which were once tucked close to the stalk, become heavier as the grain kernels inside swell and mature, causing the heads to nod and hang downwards. The field, which was a sea of green, turns into a shimmering expanse of gold and amber under the sun, a breathtaking sight. This ripening process is all about the plant transferring energy from the leaves and stalk into the developing grain kernels. The plant is essentially completing its life cycle, pouring all its resources into producing viable seeds for the next generation, and, conveniently for humans, providing a nutritious food source. The sun's work during this period is paramount. Sunlight fuels the final stages of photosynthesis, helping to fill the kernels with carbohydrates, the energy that makes barley such a valuable food source. Warm, sunny days are ideal for ripening. Too much rain at this stage can be detrimental, potentially causing the grain to sprout prematurely in the head or encouraging fungal growth. As the grain ripens, its texture changes too. Those green, soft kernels become hard and dry. You can pluck a head, rub it between your hands, and feel the distinct, solid kernels separate from the chaff. The moisture content drops significantly, which is crucial for storage. Dry grain can be kept for long periods without spoiling, a vital factor for any society that relied on stored surpluses to get through the lean months or periods of drought or conflict. Ancient granaries, filled with dry grain, were the ultimate symbols of security and wealth. And the smell. As the barley ripens, the field fills with a specific scent, dry, slightly sweet, earthy, the smell of mature grain ready for harvest. It's a smell that would have been deeply familiar and reassuring to ancient people, a scent of abundance and impending sustenance. You can almost breathe it in now, that dry, golden smell of ripeness hanging heavy in the air. This stage, the golden transformation, is a period of watchful waiting for the farmers and temple attendants. The hard work of planting, nurturing, and protecting is largely done. Now, it's up to the sun and the weather to complete the process. They would constantly check the heads, feeling the firmness of the kernels, assessing the color of the stalks, waiting for the precise moment of readiness. Harvesting too early means the grain hasn't fully matured and will be less nutritious and harder to store. Harvesting too late risks the heads becoming brittle and shattering, dropping precious grain back onto the ground where it's lost. Getting the timing just right is crucial. The filling of the grain kernels, turning the light green heads into heavy, nodding masses of gold, is a beautiful illustration of life's purpose coming to fruition. Each kernel is packed with the potential for a new plant, a tiny package of genetic information and stored energy. For the temple barley, these kernels also represent the physical embodiment of the year's growth, the culmination of sacred effort and ritual care, destined for the altar. A mainstream historical fact is that accurate timing of the harvest was one of the most critical decisions for ancient farmers. Communities often had experienced individuals whose judgment was trusted to determine the optimal harvest day. This wasn't a decision made lightly. It affected the entire community's food supply for the coming year. For temple fields, this decision might have involved consultation with priests, perhaps even taking into account auspicious dates in the religious calendar alongside the practical assessment of the crop's ripeness. There's a quirky tidbit regarding this ripening phase. Some ancient traditions involved symbolic offerings made directly to the field or the spirit of the grain just before harvest, perhaps asking the plant to release its bounty willingly or thanking it for its generosity. This could involve leaving small amounts of food or drink among the stalks or performing quiet rituals of gratitude. Imagine walking through the golden field, perhaps leaving a few dates or a small cup of water at the edge, a quiet thank you whispered to the ripening barley. It's a personal, humble acknowledgement of the gift that is about to be received from the earth. Historians still argue about the extent to which ancient Persian religious practices incorporated animistic beliefs, the idea that spirits inhabit natural objects like plants, versus a more purely monotheistic or dualistic theological framework. Were these ripening rituals directed at a specific barley spirit, or were they simply acts of gratitude directed towards the benevolent forces of creation in a broader sense? The truth is likely complex and varied depending on the specific region and community, but the sense of reverence for the life-giving grain was undoubtedly strong. As you stand in the golden field, the sun warm on your skin, you feel the stillness and the weight of the ripening grain. The air is dry and fragrant. The barley stalks, once reaching for the sky, are now bowing their heads, heavy with the promise of the harvest. It's a moment of quiet anticipation, of culmination. The long journey from seed to full maturity is almost complete. The plant has done its work, the sun has done its work, and the people who tended this field have done theirs. All that remains is the final act, gathering the bounty that the earth has provided. The golden transformation is complete, and the field stands ready for the harvest ritual to begin. The heavy heads nod like silent sentinels, waiting. The field stands golden, the barley heads heavy and nodding, the air dry and fragrant with ripeness. The golden transformation is complete, and now comes the moment the entire year's effort has been building towards, the harvest. This isn't just a practical necessity. For the sacred temple barley, it's the culmination of the plant's life cycle and the beginning of its sacred destiny, marked by ritual and intention. Deciding the precise day for the harvest was a crucial decision, steeped in both practicality and religious significance. You couldn't just wake up one morning and say, "Looks golden enough, let's cut." No, the timing had to be perfect, not just for optimal yield and quality, but potentially also for astrological or religious reasons. Was it an auspicious day on the calendar? Were the stars aligned favorably? The priests, likely in consultation with experienced farmers or agricultural officials, would have weighed the ripeness of the grain against these other factors to choose the most propitious moment. This careful, deliberate selection of the harvest day, blending agricultural readiness with calendrical or astrological timing, is a mainstream historical fact across many ancient cultures. The timing wasn't just about efficiency, it was about ensuring the harvest was blessed and successful in the eyes of the divine. Imagine the pressure: pick the wrong day, and maybe the gods aren't happy, and suddenly your precious sacred barley is plagued by misfortune. Once the day was chosen, the tools of the harvest would be readied. The primary tool for cutting grain by hand for millennia was the sickle. Picture a curved blade, typically made of stone, like flint or obsidian in very early times, bronze, or iron, set into a wooden handle. You'd hold a bunch of stalks in one hand and use the sickle in the other to cut them near the base. It's a simple tool, but incredibly effective when wielded with skill and rhythm. The blades would need to be kept sharp, a task that would happen frequently during the harvest, probably with a whetstone. You can almost hear the rhythmic scraping sound of metal on stone as the blades were honed to a keen edge, ready for the work ahead. The act of cutting the barley with these sickles was physically demanding. It required bending over or kneeling for long periods, grasping bundles of stalks, and swinging the sharp blade. Your back would ache, your hands would get calloused, and you had to be incredibly careful not to cut yourself with that sharp, curved blade. Imagine the repetitive motion, the swish of the sickle through the stalks, the rustling sound as the cut bundles were gathered. It's a rhythm dictated by the body and the tool, repeated thousands upon thousands of times across the field. It makes you appreciate modern combine harvesters, doesn't it? Though watching those enormous machines probably isn't as soothing for bedtime. For the temple barley, the act of cutting wasn't just agricultural labor, it was a sacred ritual. The first cutting might be done by a priest or a designated temple official, perhaps with specific prayers or chants offered as the first stalks were gathered. This act of severing the plant from the earth was likely seen as a significant moment, releasing the life force and bounty contained within the grain. There might be specific ways the stalks were cut, or how they were laid out after cutting. This blending of practical labor with ritual action transformed farming into an act of worship. There's a quirky tidbit here about ancient harvest rituals. In some ancient Near Eastern traditions, the spirit of the grain was believed to reside in the last standing stalks in the field, or in the very first bundles cut. Special care or rituals might be associated with these specific portions of the harvest, perhaps offering them reverence or attempting to coax the spirit safely from the field into the storage areas. While direct evidence for this in Achaemenid Persia is less clear-cut, the idea of acknowledging and honoring the life force embodied in the harvested grain fits within the broader framework of their agricultural beliefs. Perhaps the very first bundle cut from the temple field was treated with particular reverence, carried back to the temple with ceremony, signifying the arrival of the sacred harvest. Welcome home, grain spirit. Hope you had a good growing season. As the cutting progressed across the field, bundles of stalks would be gathered and tied. These bundles would then be left in the field to dry further in the sun, standing upright in stooks or shocks to protect the heads from moisture and allow air circulation. The field would slowly change again, from a flat expanse of standing gold to a landscape dotted with these geometric bundles, like miniature tents scattered across the stubble. Historians still argue whether the labor for harvesting temple lands was performed by enslaved people, tenant farmers fulfilling obligations, hired laborers, or community members participating in a collective religious effort. It was likely a combination of these, varying by region and the specific temple's resources and relationship with the local population. However the labor was organized, the work itself was hard and time-sensitive. The entire crop needed to be cut before bad weather set in or the grain shattered and was lost. This created a period of intense activity, with everyone available pitching in. The atmosphere in the field during the harvest, despite the hard work, was likely also one of shared purpose and anticipation. The end of the growing season was in sight, the promise of food for the coming year was being realized, and for this sacred barley, its destiny in the temple was drawing near. There might be calls and shouts as people worked, perhaps even work songs to set a rhythm and lift spirits. Children might help gather stray heads or bring water to the workers. It was a community effort, focused on bringing in the vital crop. As the sun begins to set on the chosen harvest day, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, the field is transformed. The golden stalks are gone, replaced by rows of stubble and scattered bundles of cut barley. The air still carries the scent of the ripe grain, now mixed with the dry smell of cut stalks and earth. The bulk of the harvest is gathered, resting in the field, waiting for the next stage, separating the precious grain from the straw and chaff. The act of cutting, the sacred severance from the earth, is complete. The journey from field to temple continues, but now the barley has been gathered, ready for the next crucial steps of processing that will make it suitable for both sustenance and sacred offering. The field, having given its bounty, now rests, preparing for the next cycle, while the harvested barley awaits its further transformation. The field is quiet now, except for the occasional rustle of drying bundles. The golden stalks have been cut and gathered, standing in stooks or lying in piles, waiting. The next critical stage in the journey of the temple barley is separating the grain kernel, the valuable part, from the rest of the plant material, the stalks, straw, and the protective casings around the kernels, chaff. This process is known as threshing and winnowing, and it's another ancient, labor-intensive but vital step. Imagine the threshing floor. This was typically a hard, flat, circular area, often made of packed earth or stone, usually located near the fields or the village. The harvested barley bundles would be brought here, the stalks spread out in a thick layer. The goal of threshing is to break the grain heads apart and loosen the kernels from the rest of the plant material. There were several ways to do this in the ancient world. One common method was trampling. Animals, often oxen, would be driven repeatedly over the layer of barley stalks on the threshing floor. Their hooves would break up the heads and loosen the grain. You can almost hear the rhythmic pounding of the hooves, the lowing of the animals, the dust rising into the air. It's a scene of controlled chaos, the power of the animals harnessed for the crucial task of grain separation. Another method involved dragging heavy sledges or rollers, often studded with stones or metal, pulled by animals over the grain. This would crush the stalks and thresh the heads. Yet another was simply beating the bundles with flails, long wooden sticks hinged together, swung down onto the grain. Imagine the steady thwack 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 of the flails, a sound that would echo across the landscape during harvest season. This labor might be done by people, alone or in groups, a strenuous, dusty job. Regardless of the method used, trampling, rolling, or flailing, the result is a tangled mix of straw, chaff, dust, and the loosened grain kernels, some still in their husks. This mixture needs to be refined. This brings us to the next step, winnowing. Winnowing is the process of separating the lighter chaff and straw pieces from the heavier grain kernels, using the power of the wind. Imagine the scene on a breezy day. The threshed material is gathered up and held aloft, typically in a wide, flat basket or tray, called a winnowing basket or fan. The worker stands facing the wind and slowly pours or tosses the mixture into the air. As the mixture falls, the wind catches the lighter chaff and bits of straw, blowing them away, while the heavier grain kernels fall relatively straight down, forming a pile on the threshing floor. It takes skill and practice to do this effectively, controlling the flow of the mixture and working with the wind. Too little wind, and the chaff won't separate. Too much wind, and you might lose some precious grain. You can picture the slow, rhythmic movement of the winnowing basket, the cloud of dust and chaff blowing away, gradually revealing the clean pile of grain. It's a visually striking process, a clear separation of the valuable from the less so, using the simple, natural force of the wind. This method of winnowing is a mainstream historical fact, used across countless cultures for millennia. For the sacred temple barley, this separation process might have been performed with extra care and perhaps ritual accompanying it. The purity of the final grain product was paramount. Any contamination, any inclusion of foreign material or imperfect kernels, could potentially render the grain unsuitable for sacred use. Imagine temple attendants, perhaps robed, performing the winnowing with particular focus and solemnity, ensuring only the finest, cleanest grain was collected. There's a quirky or fringe tidbit here. In some ancient traditions, the wind used for winnowing was seen as having spiritual significance, perhaps embodying a deity or spirit involved in the separation process, literally blowing away impurities. Rituals might be performed to invoke a favorable wind or to thank the wind spirit for its assistance in purifying the grain. While specific Achaemenid wind winnowing rituals are not widely documented, the general idea of seeing natural forces as imbued with spiritual significance was common. You can imagine a priest offering a prayer to the wind before the winnowing began, asking for a steady, clean breeze to help purify the sacred grain. Historians still argue about the specific locations and facilities used for threshing and winnowing temple barley. Was it done on a dedicated threshing floor within the temple complex itself, or on a communal threshing floor used by the wider community, but with the temple grain handled separately and with special care? A dedicated temple threshing floor would emphasize the sacred separation and control over the process, while using a communal one might highlight the temple's integration with the local agricultural community. Both possibilities exist, and the practice likely varied. As the threshing and winnowing are completed, you see the result, a pile of relatively clean, golden barley kernels. They are hard, dry, and ready for storage or further processing. The straw, the dried stalks, isn't wasted. It's valuable material for animal fodder, bedding, building material, mixed with mud brick or fuel. The chaff might also have uses, perhaps as animal feed filler. But the focus is on the grain, the concentrated essence of the plant's life force. Standing on the threshing floor, feeling the dust settle and the dry straw underfoot, you appreciate the finality of this step. The barley plant, as a whole, has completed its journey from seed to mature, harvested stalks. Now, its essence, the grain, has been separated, purified by wind and labor, ready for its final destination. It has been transformed from a plant in the field to a pile of precious kernels, ready to be taken from the open air into the storage rooms of the temple, awaiting its transformation into an offering. The air still carries the smell of dry grain and dust, a scent of hard work and successful separation, marking the end of the agricultural cycle and the beginning of the sacred preparation. You've witnessed the threshing and winnowing, the ancient dance between labor and wind that separated the precious grain kernels from the straw and chaff. Now, the result of all that effort, the pile of clean, golden barley, is ready to leave the dusty threshing floor and be brought into the more controlled environment of the temple. Imagine the grain being carefully gathered, perhaps scooped into sturdy sacks or large ceramic vessels. It's a physical transfer, carrying the tangible result of the harvest, the embodiment of a year's growth and ritual care, from the agricultural space into the sacred space. As you follow the grain being carried, maybe on the backs of donkeys or by temple attendants, back towards the temple structure, you feel the weight of it, both literally and figuratively. This isn't just food, it's destined for a higher purpose. The journey from the open field, through the dusty process of threshing, now culminates in its arrival at the temple gates. Once inside the temple complex, the grain would likely undergo further cleaning and preparation. Even after winnowing, small stones, dirt clods, or remaining bits of chaff might be mixed in. Purity was paramount for temple offerings. This secondary cleaning might involve spreading the grain out on mats and carefully picking through it by hand, or perhaps using finer sieves than those used on the threshing floor. Imagine the meticulous work, grain by grain, ensuring that only the cleanest, most perfect kernels were deemed suitable for the rituals. This emphasis on purity for religious materials is a mainstream historical fact common to many ancient religions. You wouldn't offer something considered impure to the divine. It's about respect and ensuring the offering is acceptable. Depending on the specific ritual or the form the offering needed to take, the barley grain might be used in several ways. It could be kept whole, perhaps as a symbolic offering of the unprocessed bounty of the earth. More likely, however, it would be processed further, often by grinding it into flour. Turning grain into flour in the ancient world was another labor-intensive process. It typically involved using millstones. Picture two stones, often heavy and circular. The grain would be placed between them, and one stone would be rotated against the other, crushing and grinding the kernels into powder. Early millstones were simple saddle querns, a large, slightly concave lower stone and a smaller, loaf-shaped upper stone rubbed back and forth. Later, rotary querns, where a round upper stone turned on a pivot over a round lower stone, became more efficient. This grinding would have been done by hand, pushing or turning the upper stone, a rhythmic, repetitive motion. Imagine the steady sound of stone grinding against stone, the fine barley dust rising into the air, coating everything nearby with a pale gold film. It's hard, tiring work, requiring strength and endurance. This grinding process transforms the hard, inedible grain into a usable form, flour. This flour could then be used to bake ceremonial breads, cakes, or other food offerings. The consistency of the grind might vary depending on the intended use, coarser for some purposes, finer for others. The temple might have a dedicated area for grinding, perhaps a small room with millstones and storage containers for the resulting flour. You can almost smell the dry, slightly sweet scent of fresh barley flour hanging in the air there. But barley could also be used to make liquids for rituals, specifically fermented beverages similar to beer or other types of ritual drinks. For this, the grain would first need to be malted. Malting involves soaking the grain in water to initiate germination, then drying it to halt the process. This converts some of the starches into sugars, which can then be fermented. The specifics of ancient malting and brewing processes are complex and varied, but barley was a common grain for this purpose across the Near East. This potential process adds another layer to the barley's transformation. It's not just solid food, it can become a sacred drink. Imagine shallow pits or vessels where the grain was soaked, racks where it was spread to dry, the careful monitoring of temperature and moisture needed to achieve successful malting. It requires patience and specific knowledge. Once the barley had been processed, whether cleaned whole, ground into flour, or potentially malted, it would be carefully stored within the temple complex. This storage was crucial. The processed grain and flour needed to be kept dry and safe from pests like rodents and insects. Large ceramic storage jars, woven baskets, or designated storage rooms, granaries, within the temple walls would serve this purpose. These areas would likely be kept clean and secure, protecting the valuable sacred ingredients. There's a quirky or fringe tidbit related to storing sacred grain. Some ancient traditions involved placing protective symbols, talismans, or performing minor rituals around storage areas to ward off pests or ensure the quality of the stored grain remained high, believing that spoilage could be caused by negative spiritual influences. Imagine a priest painting a specific symbol on the side of a storage jar or placing a small amulet among the sacks of grain, a quiet act of spiritual guarding for the precious contents. It's another example of the blend of practical concerns, keeping grain dry, and spiritual beliefs, protecting it from unseen harm. I suppose you could say they were literally putting their faith in their food storage. Which makes sense when your food is also your sacred offering. Historians still argue whether specific varieties of barley were preferentially used for different types of offerings, e.g., one type for flour, another for malting, or if the choice depended more on the specific rituals' requirements and regional availability. It's plausible that centuries of practice led to preferences for certain characteristics in the barley used for baking versus brewing for ritual purposes, but definitively linking specific ancient barley types to precise ritual uses remains challenging based on archaeological and textual evidence. As you stand in the area of the temple where this processing occurs, you hear the faint, rhythmic sound of grinding stone, smell the dry dust of flour, perhaps catch a faint, sweet, earthy scent from the malting area. You see the clean grain, the piles of flour, the vessels ready for use. The barley has completed its transformation from a plant in the field to a refined ingredient ready for the altar. It has been purified, processed, and stored, patiently waiting for its final role in the sacred rites. The journey from earth to offering is nearing its conclusion, with the quiet preparation work within the temple walls setting the stage for the moments of ritual consumption or presentation. The barley has been harvested, threshed, winnowed, cleaned, and perhaps ground into flour or prepared for malting, resting now within the temple walls, purified and ready. This is the culmination of its long journey from a tiny seed in the dark earth. It is about to fulfill its sacred purpose, to be used in the temple rites. Imagine walking deeper into the temple now, perhaps into a more inner chamber, a place of greater sanctity where the most important rituals take place. The air here might be different again, perhaps richer with the scent of incense, quieter, the light even more subdued. You can feel the weight of centuries of reverence in this space. The ways in which the barley was used would depend on the specific ceremony being performed. As a mainstream historical fact, offerings of food and drink, including grain and grain products, were central to religious practices across the ancient Near East, including in Persia. These offerings served various purposes, feeding the deities, conceptually, not literally, usually expressing gratitude for divine blessings, like a successful harvest, petitioning for future favor, or establishing and maintaining a connection between the human and divine realms. The simplest use might be as an offering of whole grain, perhaps placed in bowls or on altars as a direct presentation of the earth's bounty. You can picture piles of the clean, golden barley kernels arranged with care, a tangible symbol of the harvest brought into the divine presence. More often, however, it would be used in a processed form. Barley flour could be baked into special ceremonial breads or cakes. These wouldn't be everyday loaves. They would likely be prepared according to specific recipes, perhaps shaped in particular ways, and baked with ritual intent. Imagine flatbreads, round cakes, or other forms placed carefully on the altar, fragrant from the baking. The act of baking itself could be a ritual, transforming the raw flour into a cooked offering, a further step in its journey of transformation. If the barley was malted, it could be used to create a fermented beverage, a type of ancient beer or a ritual drink. This liquid offering could be poured out as a libation, a common practice where a small amount of a liquid is poured onto an altar, the ground, or into a special vessel as an offering. Imagine the glug of the liquid as it's poured, soaking into the earth or disappearing into a porous stone, a direct offering to the divine. This use of a fermented grain drink in ritual is also a widespread practice historically, often symbolizing conviviality, abundance, or a way to commune with the spiritual world. You wouldn't want to mix up the sacred barley beer with the stuff for after-work relaxation, though. That could lead to an awkward divine interaction. Whoops, offered you the common stuff again, sorry. The symbolic power of the barley in these rites is immense. It represents life itself, fertility, and the cycle of growth and renewal. By offering the grain, the priests and the community were offering the very essence of their sustenance, acknowledging that it came from forces beyond their control and seeking to ensure that those forces remained benevolent. It was a physical representation of the connection between the earth, which produced the grain, and the divine realm, which granted the fertility and the seasons necessary for its growth. The offering wasn't just about giving something to the gods, it was about participating with them in the ongoing act of creation and sustenance. This offering symbolized gratitude for the past harvest and hope for future prosperity. It was an act of reciprocity, giving back a portion of the bounty received. In the context of the Achaemenid worldview, it could also be seen as strengthening the forces of Ahura Mazda, the wise lord, associated with life and abundance, in the ongoing cosmic struggle against negative forces. The offering of sacred barley was a concrete contribution to the forces of good in the world. It makes you think, doesn't it? Your breakfast cereal, if it's barley, could technically be a tiny, unintentional cosmic good deed. You're welcome, universe. There's a quirky or fringe tidbit here. Some ancient texts from the broader region mention beliefs that the gods or spirits actually consumed the essence of the offering, leaving the physical substance behind for the priests or worshippers to consume later in a communal meal, thus sharing in the sacred energy. This idea of a shared sacred meal, where the offering facilitates communion, adds another layer to the use of the barley. Imagine the priests and perhaps important community members gathering after the main ritual, consuming the ceremonial bread or drink, imbued with the spiritual energy of the offering. It's a form of literal, ancient you are what you eat in a very profound sense. Historians still argue about the exact frequency and specific nature of these barley-based rituals in Achaemenid temples across the vast empire. Were they daily occurrences, linked to the agricultural calendar, or performed only on specific religious festivals? Did different temples have slightly different rites or recipes for their sacred barley offerings? Surviving texts and archaeological evidence provide tantalizing clues, but a complete, standardized picture is elusive. It's one of those fascinating puzzles where you have pieces of information from different places and times, trying to reconstruct the whole picture, which means there's plenty of room for academic disagreement. As the ritual concludes, whether with the offering of grain, the consumption of sacred bread, or the pouring of a libation, the barley's journey from seed in the field to sacred offering is complete. Its life cycle, for this specific purpose, has reached its endpoint. It has been born from the earth, nurtured, grown strong, harvested, processed, and finally presented to the divine. It has served its ultimate function, bridging the gap between the physical and spiritual realms. But the story doesn't truly end here, not in the cycle of things. The very act of offering the barley for a successful harvest implies a hope for the next harvest. The seeds for that next cycle have perhaps already been selected and planted, or are waiting for the right time. The priests and farmers will continue their work, the earth will continue its turning, the sun and rain will do their part. The life cycle of the barley, and its sacred journey, is a continuous loop. The offerings made today help ensure the possibility of offerings tomorrow. The journey we have traced, from the quiet field to the solemn temple, is one that has been repeated, season after season, year after year, for centuries, ensuring the sustenance of both body and spirit in the ancient Persian world. The final act of offering is not just an end, it is also a renewal, a promise of continuation, a turning of the wheel of life and abundance. The air in the temple slowly settles, carrying the last whispers of prayer and the faint, lingering scent of consecrated grain. The sacred purpose has been fulfilled. All right, the journey through the life cycle of the temple barley is complete. We've followed it from its humble beginnings as a seed in a specially chosen field, through its struggles against the elements, its growth and ripening under the Persian sun, the labor of harvest and processing, and finally its elevation to a sacred offering within the quiet walls of the temple. It's a story of patience, perseverance, deep connection to the earth, and the profound intertwining of practical life with spiritual belief in the ancient world. Now, as the echoes of ancient chants fade and the imagined scent of dry grain and incense softens, it's time to let go of the field, the temple, and the long-ago world of Achaemenid Persia. The barley's work is done, its story told for tonight. Your own day is winding down, the demands of reality receding like the historical details we've explored. Feel yourself drifting away from that distant time and place, back to the comfort and quiet of your own space. The images can soften now, the golden fields blurring into gentle waves of color, the temple walls dissolving into the stillness, the figures of farmers and priests becoming like mist. There's nothing left to strive for, nothing left to listen hard to understand. Just ease. Let the quiet rhythm of the narrative fade into the background hum of your own environment. The history we've covered is solid, but tonight, it can simply be a gentle weight, helping you settle further into relaxation. The past is resting, you can rest too. Just breathe. Let go. Sleep is waiting.